Hey y'all. So I wanted to talk to y'all about the stigma. Does the stigma have you stuck? I feel like for a lot of us, it does have us stuck in the positions that we feel like we can't move on to because we're not operating in the capacity that people want us to. A lot of times I realize, okay, so let me back up some. So, as a nurse operating in the cannabis space, I realized that they always want to talk about this stigma, the stigma is always the reason why cannabis advocates can't get anywhere with communicating about cannabis. And as I heard that more and more, I became really interested in this phenomenon because it's true, right? Like if I bring up this topic, a lot of times, people will shut down because of what they think is like the bias kind of comes in and interferes with the conversation that we're having. And people assume that they hear one thing, and I'm saying something totally different than what they expected because the conversations I have are not what people expect most of the time, right? And I began to want to explore the concept of the stigma because I started to realize or recognize a little bit of a pattern in that on the person who's giving the information or the communicator, a lot of times we fall into the trap of playing a part in the stigma. And then, as for the person who's receiving the information or the receiver, that person sometimes doesn't want to listen because of the automatic bias or the stigma they have against the topic at hand. And so why do I care, right? So I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for 14 years. And when I entered the cannabis industry, I noticed something just really different. So I'm also an advocate. I'm the owner of Cannabis Nursing Solutions, and I provide education to nurses about cannabis. And I also do speaking engagements and, guest appearances on podcasts and things of that nature. So I have a lot of conversation with people about cannabis, but not only cannabis, just my own personal story. And part of my story is being a nurse, um, being a victim of cyber theft, suffering from postpartum depression and things of that nature. And a lot of times people will connect with me because of some of those topics, but then other times people will be repelled by me because of some of those topics. And it just depends on what their own experience was and the assumption that my experience was similar to theirs or disdainfully different from theirs. So I wanted to kind of just level set. I always like doing definitions. And the definition of a stigma is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. And so we hear stigma all the time in relation to cannabis, but it really is a stigma against the person itself based on the definition or a circumstance of things of that nature. So when we talk about the stigma against cannabis, we're actually talking about the experience of the consumer. Or if we're talking about a stigma against a nurse, we're talking about the representation or the stigma against the experience of a nurse. So, how does that come up for me? Um, well, stigma against a nurse, let's say, shows up when we want to call nurses heroes. So if I'm not operating in my hero like capacity, does that make me any less of a nurse? And then if I want to do something outside of what I am as a nurse, does that make me any less of a nurse? And am I blocking myself because I'm not operating in the full capacity of my hero ness, right? Or as a woman, if I choose not to, let's say, come off as the most feminine in a moment, and opt into masculinity in a second or in a moment, does that make me any less woman? Right. So some of these conversations come up in different capacities when it comes to different things. And I started thinking about them in relation to who I am. And I feel like, and I might be wrong, but I feel like the stigma comes up more often than a lot of people like to realize. So I wrote the book Stigmatized. It's in at Amazon if you're interested, or you can go to www.stigmatizethebook.com and you can check it out. And I actually highlight a lot of the stigmas that I personally felt like I've experienced in my lifetime and how I found balance and how I approach the stigmas, right? Or how I approach the experiences that I have been gifted with to experience to find wisdom in them. And when we talk about these ideas or these biases, it becomes really difficult to separate yourself from the roles that we play. And for me, for a long time, the role that I felt like I played was as a nurse, and that's just who I was. And it took a long time after I quit my job to grieve the role that I was playing as a nurse and to recognize more that I was more than just a nurse. I am also now an author. When I wrote the book Asa's Medicine, which is also found in Amazon if you want to check it out, but when I wrote the book Asa's Medicine, I didn't think that I was actually an author. I didn't feel like I fit into the role. So I actually had a stigma on what I felt like an actual author was. And it actually prompted me to write the nonfiction books, Asa's Medicine. Um, or when I became an entrepreneur, there are some negative stigmas against entrepreneurs, like we're shisty or we're trying to take people's money. And to be honest with you, I feel like that's unwarranted. Like I feel like there is a space to learn more about what entrepreneurship is in order to understand the business that you're working with or the brand that you're working with, and give people an opportunity to offer a service that could potentially elevate you to your next version of yourself or your elevated version of being, and or just to purchase a product and give other businesses a chance. But a lot of times people won't, because they're stuck on the brands that they're familiar with, because they, quote unquote, trust that brand. But some of these brands that we trust, that we don't have a stigma on, or maybe it is a stigma, I don't know, you all tell me. um, a lot of times they don't advocate for the people that are buying from them. Black and brown communities, women, they don't support those groups of people. So, essentially you're investing into their business, supporting your idea of what you think is good or bad, and not necessarily giving other people a shot because of your idea of what entrepreneurship is. But the people who start those big name businesses and brands are also entrepreneurs. It's just that they have built it up to a place where it's faceless and nameless, and you don't associate it with the person in most cases. Amazon's a little bit different, right? So I don't know. I just felt like I needed to have this conversation about stigma, especially with the book being released today. We're having shipping day in a couple of days, but you know, as I began putting my book out to people, getting feedback, getting reviews on Amazon, I started hearing some consistencies. And especially if I ask the question, have you ever felt stigmatized? A lot of times people start that conversation off with saying, not me. And then I'll give examples of times where they potentially could have felt stigmatized just based off of their gender, or their race, or their job description, or their financial class. Like if I bring some of those examples up, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, yeah, that's happened to me before. And I feel like bringing awareness to the stigma that exists, I personally, and this is kind of my goal, and I hope that I'm able to achieve it, but being able to get to a place where we recognize where stigma exists, not feeling guilty about the stigma, but approaching other people with compassion and listening ears, to open up the realm of possibility through connection, which is what we're naturally ordained in divinely intended to do. Um, I think it'll make the world a better place. And especially in relation to the idea of cannabis, the plant. But beyond that, like this has become a bigger mission than just trying to let people know about the endocannabinoid system and that we all have one. It's about a connecting feature. So even in that point, endocannabinoid system, all humans have it. Dogs even have it, cats even have it. So in some way, I feel like that we're all connected just by that fact alone. And so, beyond that, even the human experience, it's different. But does that mean that we have to be to separate so much? I don't think so. So my hope for stigmatized and the hope for this conversation is for you to consider just all the different ways that you have been stigmatized and maybe lifting off of you the I guess the veil that kind of keeps us covered and hiding within who we are and the roles that we play, and giving us more opportunity to find people to connect with more on a day-to-day basis, from the people that provide you a service at the grocery store or at the mechanic shop or whatever, whatever you're doing on your day-to-day basis, and being able to offer a smile, because that is a universal communication tool, and find ways to connect with other people. That stigma exists, but we don't have to allow it to if we bring attention to it. So that's the end of my conversation today. I would love to know what you all think about it. If you have time, go to Amazon and get a copy of Stigmatized, the book. Get some insight, especially my fellow nurses out there. Even though I wrote the book intended for nurses and it is from a nurse's point of view, I have found that a lot of women have connected with this book as well. I haven't had as much opportunity to share it with men. So if you are a male who has ever felt stigmatized too, I definitely would like your feedback and your input on the book. And I would like to know what you think. So thank you all so much for listening. Have a great day. Definitely check it out, www.stigmatizethebook.com. If you have questions, you can email me at gratitude@cannabisnursingsolutionsllc.com.